Hello and welcome to Focus Your Bokeh. My name is Renee and I will be your host. We'll be focusing our discussions on photography and mostly the battle between film and digital. Hearing for and against points of view from various guests over the coming weeks and months. Can film and digital ever get along and coexist? Have they been coexisting this whole time? Or will one format eventually win and destroy the other? Join us on this journey, focusing your ear lens onto our first guest, who is here to discuss how they feel about the battle between the formats. Our guest for this episode is Anthony Huynh. Welcome, Anthony. We met a few years back working at Digidirect in Miranda. I think we were actually hired in the same week. I remember you worked the first weekend, which was actually the Black Friday Cyber weekend, which would have been crazy. I was like, hell no, I'm not going to spend my first weekend shift at a new job during Cyber weekend. So props to you, man, for going in head first. Your passion has always stuck out to me. When did your interest in photography start?
Yeah, nothing like starting out in the deep end, right?
Yeah.
It was sort of a sink or swim scenario, and luckily I came through all right, I think. My passion for photography started out actually at quite a young age, believe it or not. I mean, I've always been a bit of a nerd when it comes to electronics and gadgets, but I never really viewed a camera as fitting into either of those categories, strangely. I always viewed it as just a tool from a young age, maybe 6 or 7 years old. I recognized that the camera was just a tool for capturing a moment in time. That's a moment in time that you may never relive again. So
Yeah.
for me, a camera was a tool more than a gadget. And me being the perfectionist that I am, I'm always looking to try to capture that moment in the highest quality possible.
Yeah, I feel that. I kind of think I have the same approach. And how has your passion evolved from then to when you started working at Digidirect?
Well, yeah. Since then, and before I started working at Digi, I managed to buy my first DSLR, and I was able to learn what aperture was, ISO, shutter speed, and how those affected the final photo. And that sort of allowed me to have more creative options and allow me to be able to transform what I envisioned in my mind to the final photograph.
Yeah, there's a big learning curve to photography. Like once you get started into it, you're like, oh, I got it. There's a lot to learn.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you feel like your passion or feeling towards photography evolved while we were working in the retail store? And if so, how?
Yeah, working at Digidirect, naturally you get to play with all the gear that comes in, and you're always one of the first people to get your hands on a new camera or a new lens, and you're always interacting with people who are so passionate about photography to the point where you're sort of numb to that new gear feeling, and you start to appreciate the art of photography and the skill and effort that comes with capturing an amazing photo. Because as much as I like to talk about gear all day, it's refreshing when a customer comes in and talks you through the process on how they got a certain shot, and you see the light up in their eyes when they show you the photo. It's just more empowering than the guy who talks about how much smoother the bokeh is at f2.8 than it is at f4.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So how do you pronounce bokeh? Like
Bokeh?
Bokeh? There's just a bit of discussion, of course, about how to properly pronounce it. Someone asked me last night, like, how are you meant to actually pronounce it? And I'm like, well, I say bokeh. That's probably wrong, but yeah, that's just how I say it.
I'm pretty sure bokeh is right, because bokeh is supposed to be Japanese, and it's bokeh.
Yeah. There's a few people that are like, it's bokeh, like bokeh-licious. But that's a whole different discussion.
Yeah.
I did say last night that I was thinking about doing a whole episode on the pronunciation of bokeh. When we worked at Digidirect, we sold and developed film. You helped out in the lab occasionally, right? Usually with the sales or helping customers. Have you ever tried shooting with film?
Yeah, I know you're a little older than me, Renee, but I also grew up shooting on film. Not necessarily an SLR, but what people these days would probably consider a point and shoot, I guess. I think it was an Olympus, and when I was young, my parents would carry it around in the bags whenever we went out on the weekends, and there'd be a few extra rolls of film as well. And then on a Saturday morning, I'd go with my mother to this photo lab, and it'd always have this very peculiar acidic smell, which now, from my experience working in the lab, I know was most likely the smell of the developer.
Yeah.
And we'd hand in our rolls of film, and we'd come back in a couple of hours, pick it up. And the anticipation of how the photos come out, it's not really something a lot of younger kids these days have experienced. And as a kid, I never really thought about how the film went from a roll into photographs. And after working in the lab, I certainly have newfound respect and appreciation for the people who work in the photo lab.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's definitely a different experience working in a lab and seeing the process in front of you, how it all comes together.
Yeah.
Do you think that you learned anything new about film while working in the store?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I didn't know what a wet lab or dry lab was before I started working at Digidirect. And I used to be one of those people who would go to Big W and get prints done there for 4 cents a photo. But after working in a real photo lab that did wet prints, I could never go back. The colors you get out of a wet lab, they're just much richer and nicer. And I didn't know there were still so many people, an increasing amount actually, of people who should film, because a lot of people would buy these old SLR cameras and there'd be something wrong with it and they'd bring it in for us to see if we could help out with them. So it's nice to see an increasing appreciation of an analog art form.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what I learned as well working in the lab, the difference between wet and dry, and I will never be going back to a dry lab. I can guarantee you that. Do your parents or your family still have that Olympus camera you had when you were growing up?
Yeah, they actually still have it. It doesn't get used anymore, but it's just there, I guess, for memento's sake.
Nice. Things have definitely changed since we worked together. Have you continued your interest in photography since then? And did you continue to photograph things throughout the pandemic, or did you take it easy like a lot of us did?
Photography definitely took a step back in my life during the pandemic compared to when I was working at Digidirect. And I guess now working from home 9 to 5 and during the pandemic not being able to go out was also a contributing factor, I guess.
Yeah.
Most of my photography these days is mostly food photography. So taking photos of food that I've had at a cafe or restaurant, probably uploading it to Google Maps. Yeah, maybe on a good day I might go for a walk around my neighborhood, do some street photography, but it's definitely not like it used to be where I'd literally take my camera everywhere with me.
Yeah, I feel that. I'm getting hungry just thinking about the food photos that you take. Do you feel like you've sort of let photography as a passion or a hobby go in a bit in way of other pursuits and interests in life?
Yeah, definitely think I have. I don't know if it's an age thing, but I guess other things have taken priority in my life. So photography isn't as prevalent as it used to be in my daily life, but it still rears its head every now and then, such as the other day when I was working. And I looked out my window, I saw a kookaburra sitting on my fence, and I just dropped everything to go grab my camera bag, pull up my 70-200, put on the camera as quickly as I can, and started snapping away. And then there'd be other times where I'd set up a light tent on my dinner table to take photos of my shiny new watch on a 105 macro lens. Actually, now that I think about it, most of my photography is actually product photography, because I live in a small apartment where space is limited, so anything that isn't used needs to be sold on Gumtree or Facebook Marketplace. Yeah, I always ensure the photos that go with my listings are top notch. The people who come pick up the item always comment on how nice the photos are.
Oh yeah, I always get a little bit excited when I've got something to sell, because I'm like, ooh, I could take a really nice picture of it.
Yeah, exactly. I feel exactly the same way.
So you work in a non-photographic environment now. Have you found it to feel different than working with other creatives that are similar-minded, like when we were working in a photographic retailer? Is it less fun or less enjoyable?
Now I work in IT, and it's another one of my passions of life. So I've never really, like photography, I've never thought of it to be boring. And even though I no longer work with photography people, there's always lots of nerds around and like-minded people who are gearheads as well. We actually have a work WhatsApp group called Droners, and it's for people who own and love flying drones. And I remember in 2019, just before the pandemic hit, during one of the last days of work before Christmas, we organized a drone day where everyone who owned a drone brought it in, and we went to a local park to fly it together. And we brought along a few people who were interested in drones but didn't have one for themselves, so they could play with it. And now it's not the Digidirect salesperson in me talking, but it's safe to say those non-drone owners at the time are now drone owners. And yeah, we'd all post pictures and videos that we take every now and then on that WhatsApp group. So I guess whether consciously or unconsciously, I've spread that enthusiasm about photography, even though I no longer work in that field.
That's so great that you have found like a great group of work people to hang out with and that you do have this similar interest. And it still is photography. Like drone is a form of photography and it is another one of your passions. So really you haven't lost out moving into a different work environment.
Yeah, no, still the same old me.
Would you consider going on more photo walks in the near future if we organise them, even if the focus was just on social factor of like-minded people getting together?
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to go on a photo walk with some other like-minded people because every time I go on a photo walk, it rekindles my passion for photography, and it's sort of a time for myself where I get to enjoy a hobby that I love, but I've put on the back burner a bit just due to time constraints or this thing called life that always somehow seems to get in the way.
Yeah.
So yeah, if there was a photo walk, I'd definitely love to join.
Awesome. Well, we might have to plan something soon.
Sounds good.
In the meantime, thank you so much for your time, Anthony, and I'll talk to you later.
Thank you so much, Renee. It's nice talking to you.
That's all we have time for this week. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook and join us on the blog, Focus Your Bokeh, and we'll see you next week.